let me quickly record the next slide. So this is moving into task 2 after discussing the task 1 off the record. We now will record this part where we look into the critical literature review. And that will now also be providing hopefully some answers to you, Dermot, with regard on what examiners expect. Now, task 2 will focus on the literature review. And those are questions put forward in the course that you're expected to practice for, and which we now will not go through in detail, but instead exactly against what is a literature review critical, because it's not only a literature review that you are expected to provide, but it is meant to be critical. So now you will start reading, and in some cases that reading firstly might have taken you half a year. And once you are good in the field, you start to understand it, you will manage to build up some boundaries, and you keep pushing until that boundary gives way. And by the way, it wasn't me drawing that, but it's taken from a source at which I encourage you to look into. And I think Matt has brilliantly illustrated how that looks like. And by the end, once you made your dent, can you tell against what existing literature is that of relevance? This is the first thing that you need to be capable to place exactly your work within the wider context of the literature. Now there stands PhD, but that will be equally valid for a DBA, because as said, even if it's practical knowledge that you will have created, it's not against nothing, it is against what is already known from the literature and how your knowledge relates to what is exactly known. And now it comes to how would I be evaluated in the Viva, in particular if I'm on a practitioner doctorate track, but the examiner has a traditional PhD. So now I've been looking into this, and actually the task 2 readings provide some background information on exactly that. And let me read from those guidances. I extracted some parts. Now, as a supervisor and examiner, I'm slightly less mystified by how a written thesis is examined. But much of the examination process is still hidden behind closed doors, which in the case for the UK is particularly true, in other countries, not that much. So, but I do not have access to what actually happens. My knowledge of what examiners do, like that of most supervisors, is based on personal experience of examining theses, observing how my thesis students were examined, anecdotes about the examination process, and ideal versions of what a thesis should be and what an examiner should do. This sort of personal knowledge tends to be partial and incomplete. I have sent thesis students through the examination gauntlet, but is their experience typical? I know how I examine a thesis, but am I typical? I know how a thesis should be examined, but are they actually examined this way? Now, and this is, Dermot, is exactly one of the things that every examiner is questioning and doubting and developing over the time. And having worked with a range of 500 doctoral students over the past years, this is a question I'm asking myself always. Is what I'm expecting to be up to the standards, in particular, if I have had the chance to look at so many theses. Now, I often do it the other way around. I go back to my thesis and see how well or not well that reads to me. And after so many years, I must say, yeah, okay, if I would write it today, it would have been looking quite differently. But then again, it was pass level, and this is what I need to relate myself to. And I think each examiner will be a bit in that situation. And there can be a disturbing disparity between what supervisors expect and what examiners implement. So there's also a sort of noise and disconnection in between the thesis supervisor and who actually will examining. So what do examiners tend to do as they examine a thesis? Are there any general trends, institutional criteria, and instructions also of a little guidance about how a thesis will actually be assessed? Each institution offers criteria for assessing a thesis, but these tend to be inadequate, vague, frequently ignored. And I think those 3 points are very valid for much of the programs where I've been looking into and for much of the feedback that I was seeing in written that were provided afterwards in examination reports. And So this is something that needs to be taken into account once you are undergoing your Viva. Now, then, is there a common length and feel? And in the same source, which is reading T21 of this week, there's a part covering exactly examiners favor a thesis that engages with the literature. Now, they look for a thesis that is situated in a relevant body of literature and which demonstrates an accurate and comprehensive understanding. Although it is necessary for thesis students to explain what has already been written on that topic, it is not enough to merely describe it. So this is exactly author A said, author B said, author C said, which is very early writing, which is typical to almost each thesis that I've been reading. But once you become more fluent, you will exactly talk in a different way. You will engage with the literature in a different way. You will analyze, interpret, categorize, and or apply the literature. So to support your view, to support the evidence that you have been finding, but also to question it, to put arguments and conclusions under conditionals. And now the metaphor of a story is useful. And I think it comes exactly down to that. Your story or narrative of the thesis must be coherent and end up. And you should engage with the literature by giving your version of the story. So you're moving away out of author A said, author B said, but you critically engage on a topic, on a theme, on whatever, with the literature and use it so in full support of your argument. And once you're doing so, I would argue that is not much different whether you're undergoing a Viva with an intention to get out a PhD or with the intention to get out a practitioner doctorate, because you're engaged with the literature in the same way. What might be different then is the knowledge that you relate it to. Is it the knowledge within your organization, or is it some knowledge that you have been contributing to the literature, and therefore, for example, also the evidence you could provide for this type of contribution? And it's particularly important for thesis candidates to use literature as evidence to support their claims. Examiners want to read a thesis where the candidate has used the literature to argue that their interpretation of the field is accurate, the research question and approach are worthwhile, appropriate, and address a significant gap either in the literature or in the organizational knowledge, and that their results in conclusion make an important contribution to either the literature or for a practitioner doctorate to the organizational knowledge. Now, I think this, once you're good on that, you will pass any Viva, and independently, what is the purpose? Is it PhD or a practitioner doctorate? So is there a common lens and view? I would say yes, and it can be simplified with critical against what. As soon as you are able to answer that, you will be able to build up your argument, and you will be able to dive into the different parts of the literature and relate it against the different what. Against what are we talking about? So that you see it is not something that is isolated. I mean, the literature review is not only chapter 2 or chapter 3, wherever you put it, but it is an integrated part of the story that you're telling. So with this, let me stop the recording. What you are now listening to will be recorded after our today's session. And basically for the third session, what I would like you to do is to go through the questions of task 2 and to prepare answers for them, and then either record those or provide answers in written, and then please submit them through the submit your task assignment function in the course environment. And in the next session, the third session, we will go through the questions of task 2 and prepare for the questions of task 3. Again, the session format will be, we will start a reflective part of the record, then we will see some part recorded like you saw today, and then afterwards move into the discussion part, which again will be off the record. With this, continued good learning, and if there are any questions, please use the course forum and reach out to us.